If you have a Bible and you'd like to follow along, please turn into Luke, the 13th chapter. This is where we'll be spending our time today. This is an interesting text. This is the last appearance, according to Luke, that Jesus makes in a synagogue. Up to now, he's been just pretty well, he preaches in fields, he preaches outdoors, he does these various things in people's homes, but he also visits synagogues on the Sabbath, and this is the last appearance. And there are reasons for this. Number one reason is the Jewish officials are following him, and they're looking for an opportunity to take him in and to seize him. So Jesus, I tell you, when you see this answer that he gives here, he's so clever, you realize this is somebody far beyond just a human being speaking. Let's take a look at the text. I'll begin reading in verse 10. On the Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman who was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years was there in the congregation. She was bent over and could not stand up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you're set free from your infirmity." He put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue ruler said to the people, "There are 6 days to work, so come and be healed on one of those, not on the Sabbath." Jesus answered the man and said, "You hypocrites, don't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or your donkey to lead them to water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, be set free, whom Satan has bound for 18 years, on the Sabbath day be set free from what has bound her?" When Jesus said this, all of his opponents in the synagogue were humiliated, but the people delighted with all the wonderful things that Jesus was doing. This is one of those miracles that is really obvious. One of the frustrations I have, and I'm not saying that God's not doing things, because I believe he is, obviously. A person comes up, you see these people on TV that have these healing ministries, ostensibly, and somebody comes up, "I've got a pain in my back," or "I can't see out of one of my eyes," or "one of my ears is blocked," or whatever, and they are healed. I'm not saying they're not. But I haven't seen anybody come up with a missing limb yet where they were healed. This is like that. I mean, this woman, 18 years, she's faithfully attending the synagogue. She's got a condition that's called, most people think, doctors who've read this, think that it's what's known as spondylitis deformans. That is, I remember a woman here in Manor who had this. Your spine begins to fuse, and as it fuses, the back portion of the vertebra grows greater than the front portion, and it gradually arches the person over until they're literally bent over at a 90-degree angle from their hip, and they're looking at the ground unless they raise their head up like this to look around. I remember a woman in Manor like that. So here's this woman. She's been coming in this synagogue. She's been suffering with this for 18 years. The text says it was from a spirit. I don't know if I'm going to take Jesus at his word. And yet Jesus walks up to her and tells her she's set free, and she stands up in front of this congregation. This is one of those healings that nobody could argue with. Nobody could say, "Oh, we're not really sure about that one." This is one that everybody was sure of. What's interesting to me is, for 18 years she's been coming into this congregation, and nobody's ever bothered to ask God to do this before. What's that about? I don't know. Jesus just simply tells her, "You're set free from your infirmity." And that's significant to me. In the movies, when somebody does something like this, what I find fascinating is the way in which they do it. There's a lot of theatrical behavior that goes on. Lots of shaking and sweating and shouting and things like that. Jesus just says, "Be set free from your infirmity," and she stands up. You know, Jesus is the only human being that has ever lived who fulfilled the law. If you take the whole of the Jewish law, all 613 precepts of Moses, set those aside and just take the law itself, as Paul sums it up. He says, good to see you this morning. Love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is the fulfillment of the whole law. That's it. And there's only been one human being on the planet who has ever fulfilled the whole law, and that's Jesus himself. This woman is a picture, in my mind, of all of humanity. She's bent. C.S. Lewis, in his writings, talks about human beings when they go wrong as being bent. I like that picture of us. And we look at each other, don't we? We look at each other through the windows of our soul, our eyes. I look at you, you look at me. We all look at one another. To us, we all look all right. But inside, we're bent. We all are. God sees us in ways that we don't see each other. He sees not only who we present ourselves to be, but He sees the need that we all have inside of us, each one of us. This synagogue ruler was upset because Jesus had done this on the Sabbath day. And at first we say, oh, that nasty synagogue ruler, he shouldn't have been like that. Look at this poor woman. Look at the nice thing Jesus did. But we forget, these people took their law very, very seriously. It was precious to them. And so the fact that Jesus did this on the Sabbath as an infringement in the synagogue ruler's mind of the law was not him just being an evil person. He's doing his very best to be a good synagogue ruler, but he was just wrong. I remember one day I was working on this job, and I heard this terrible racket across the street. I was running a pressure washer, so I couldn't hear a lot. So what was going on across the street was loud enough to overcome the sound of the pressure washer, which I usually wear earplugs because it's so loud. And it was a dog across the street that was tied up outside. And I could see the dog's water bowl, but I could also see that the dog was so wrapped up around a pole that he couldn't get to the water bowl. He was crying for somebody to come let him go to get to the water. You know, we're like that. God places things in front of us, good things. And yet, because of the things that we hold on to in our lives, we kind of wrap ourselves around a bunch of poles that we can't get to what God is offering. We do it to ourselves so often. We like things that are orderly better than we like people. Think about that for a moment. If you don't believe that, I go in a bunch of churches because of the meetings that we have with the association and different things. And I'll go into a church and there'll be a sign that says, no running. And over here it says, no eating or drinking over here. And I mean, you go on, and then some of them even have a whole bunch of rules. There was one church, I'm not going to say where they are, but I've been in there several times. The whole wall, like between those windows, is covered up with a bunch of rules. That if you'll obey these rules, God will like you better. We're like that. We like to set all of these parameters for ourselves, and we forget that God looks at people a whole lot different than we do. I mean, I just say it like it is. For me, I love the fact that in this congregation, while I'm up here doing this, if somebody gets thirsty and they decide to have a Coke, they can go back and grab a can and pop the top and go ahead with the rest of the service uninterrupted, or have an oatmeal cream pie while I'm doing it. I mean, that to me is the way it should be. I'll never forget when I was a kid. Not me. I'm sorry. Let me go back. I'm not going to go back that far. Let me go back to being a young father. Happy Father's Day to everybody, by the way. When I was a young father, I was going into this large church, and there was another guy who was a young father who was walking with us. And I don't even remember why Jackson wasn't there, but his little boy was there. Boy about 5 years old. Little boys, I mean, there's just something in them. They run everywhere. They don't walk anywhere. They run. If you got to go from here to James, they're going to run. They're not just going to walk calmly between point A and point B. And this little boy started to run. And his father reached out and snatched him by the arm and said, "We don't run in church." And I remember thinking to myself, why? Why not? I mean, he's 5 years old. And you know, those kinds of things that we do poison people. That's poison. That little boy will grow up with an idea in his head. There's a big difference between the way God really is and the pictures that some of us paint, wherein we look at God as this big cop just waiting for us to mess up so that he can get that cattle prod out and give us a jolt. That's how a lot of us look at God all the time. And that's like being that dog wrapped up around a pole that can't get to the water. And we place ourselves in those positions by the way in which we treat other people, the way in which we talk about other people, and also in the way in which we forgive other people. See, Christianity is so different from, you take any other world religion on the planet, it talks about the people. Christianity talks about you and me. That Jesus died for us one at a time. It's the only system that talks about individuals. Did you know our whole system of freedom in our government is based upon the fact of the importance of one individual made in God's image? If you take that away, we're just people. But one individual matters more than the nation matters. God doesn't see this congregation. He sees KG. Right? He sees Colin. He sees James. He sees Becky. He sees each one of us. He doesn't see the congregation. He doesn't see Ware County. He doesn't see the state of Georgia. He doesn't see the United States. He sees all the people in it. All the people. Every person matters more to him than the nation matters to him. This ruler, I noticed something about this ruler here. When it comes time for him to show the fact that he's displeased with what Jesus has done, he doesn't even talk to Jesus. He talks to the crowd and tells them that there shouldn't be this done on the Sabbath. There are 6 days. Come on one of those 6 days for healing. Don't come on the Sabbath for healing. He is so embarrassed by this moment. I can't fathom what this must have been like for him. I mean, hot sweat just must have popped out on his face when Jesus says, "You hypocrite. You'll take a donkey and lead it to water, but this woman can't be healed on the Sabbath day." See, the Sabbath rules had rules for how you handled your animals. You can lead your animals to water on the Sabbath day, and there's no problem with that. But having this woman healed was a problem. So what about you and me? I think about this ruler, and I'm going to give him some sympathy here. I think this synagogue ruler, this woman had been coming into this synagogue 18 years, bent over. Nobody's thought, well, I don't know if we ought to ask God, maybe he'll heal her. I'm going to say the synagogue ruler is a lot like we are. That the experience of living in this world day in and day out has just beaten out of him the fact that God might want to do something here. I wonder about us. I wonder if we've just grown so used to living in this concrete world that we forget that God might want to do something here. Something unexpected. If somebody is suffering, why would it be a bad thing for us to pray for them? I mean, really pray for them. Not just in the generic sense. Maybe God would want to do something here. You never know. One thing's for sure, it's kind of like playing the lottery. If you don't go get a ticket, you won't win. That's a guarantee, right? That's a promise. If we don't ask God, what might he not do? But we've got a lot of regulations. We've got all kinds of things that we set up, rules that we set up. You can't do this, you can't do that. And a lot of the rules have a good turn of heart behind them. They're not just all bad things. I think that guy who snatched his little boy's arm said, "We don't run in church." I don't think he cared so much about the little boy running in church or not. I think he was just embarrassed for himself. I think that's what was really going on. I don't think he was so concerned about it. But think about the rules that we set. I mean, length of the sermon. I was in one church once, and I was going to fill in for somebody on Sunday night. We don't have Sunday night service, so Rip's available. And so I got the call, and I said, "Well, how long should I go?" And he said to me on the phone, he said, "You got to go for 45 minutes. I said, 45 minutes? He said, "Yeah, that's what they expect." So there's a rule, right? 45 minutes. I think that's too long. I don't think anybody can pay attention for 45 minutes to anything except a really exciting movie. And even then I might drift off just a tad when I'm watching the really exciting movie. But clothing, certain kinds of clothing in certain churches, how silly is that? I mean, really, Do we think that God even sees the clothing? I don't think so. Kind of music that's good in a church. You know what that sounds like to me when I hear that? This is the kind of music that God likes better. What in the world are we thinking when we set these rules? But I will say this, we're not immune to it. There are rules in here that we don't say anything about. There are things that go on in here that we are allowing ourselves to be used to bring a kind of poison in some of the things that happen even in here. We're not aware of it. We're not aware of it. It's not a mean thing, but it's a thing in which we, for some rule that we have said something to somebody at some point, thinking ourselves to be, maybe even we're trying to be funny. I remember in a distant land, somebody had not been in a congregational setting for a long time. And a person just trying to be funny said, "Hey, good to see you, stranger." I'm thinking, I don't know about that. I mean, how do they feel about that? Do they like that? Is it funny to them? Maybe not. Maybe it is. I don't know. But little stuff that we're doing, it's not the way God would speak to us. I guarantee you, if somebody hadn't been here for 5 years and they just show up, God's just glad to see them. He's glad to see them. Do we ever ask ourselves, what things are we doing in our relationships with each other that are poisoning other people? Just poisoning them. Putting something in their minds. I'll tell you this once. Here's a personal one for me. It was a good turn of heart. It was just humor. But I have a relative in my family who checks out people's anatomy when she sees them, right? And she notices things. And she notices, everybody's laughing. Maybe everybody's got an aunt like this or an uncle like this, I don't know. But she notices things about your body that you've never noticed yourself. And when you're 7 years old and you get something like that pointed out to you, when you're 57, you still remember it. It's a poison. It's a poison. Do we do things that limit God's ability to change us and limit His ability to use us to change this world or to be a blessing in somebody's life? We do. My question for us today is, look, God wants us to be people who He can fully use to bring Himself into every setting. Always. Everywhere we go. Any relationship, doesn't matter what it is, Walmart, home at a meal, our families, our grandchildren, grandparents, siblings, everybody. He wants you and me. That's what we're here for. I mean, after all, if there was nothing for you and me to do, when we said, I believe in Jesus, we should have just poofed into heaven. But that's not how it is. We're still here. So there's stuff for us to do and be. And one of those things is to be absolutely a blessing to everybody we encounter. Jesus was. Look at this woman. 18 years bent over like this. And Jesus walks into the congregation and He's a blessing to her. She stands up straight for the first time in 18 years. He wants to bring His fullness into every sphere of your living and my living, and He wants to use us to bring His fullness into the spheres where He's not yet. Always. We get so many opportunities to be Jesus for somebody else, even if it's somebody really close, where we don't even think about it. You know, it's easy with your family to we forget. I forget people close to me. It's easy to overlook them, be harsh or whatever, because they're not going anywhere. They live here, right? The real thing, when God fills us up, and it's the real thing, people will see that and they'll be drawn because they're going to want whatever it is we've got. Whatever you're drinking, I want a big glass of that. But it's only going to be if it's the real thing, and it's only going to be if we want it, ask for it, and then allow God to do whatever He's got to do to change us to make it possible for us to be used that way. Whatever that is. If it's forgiveness we need to do that. Maybe we can't, but I guarantee you if we ask God, He'll make us able. I don't know where everybody